I always thought rock bottom would sound like a crash, like the slam of a door or a scream echoing down a hallway. But when it came for me, it was quiet. It arrived in the form of a single text, typed in trembling fingers, and sent at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. The nurse had just finished adjusting my IV. I was starting my first round of chemotherapy, feeling more scared than I'd ever been in my life. My phone buzzed on the side table. I glanced at it, half hoping it was a message from my mom asking how I felt, or maybe a friend offering to stop by. But it was Liam. "Emma, I need time. I can't do this. I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye, just an ending. We had been together for 3 years. I met him at a corner cafe when he spilled cold brew on my laptop and apologized with a smile that made it impossible to stay mad. He was charming, thoughtful, the kind of man who brought coffee to my office unannounced and remembered how I liked my toast, burnt around the edges, but soft in the middle. When I found the lump in my breast, he held me while I sobbed at 3 in the morning. He promised to be there every step of the way. He shaved his head when I started losing my hair. He joined cancer support forums. He made me feel like I wasn't alone in this. Until I was. That Tuesday, he disappeared. Not physically all at once, but emotionally, piece by piece. The texts stopped. Then the calls. Eventually, the nights he didn't come home became the norm. And finally, silence. Complete, unrelenting silence. I texted him once, "Can you please just talk to me?" and got nothing back. 2 weeks later, I found a box on my doorstep. Inside were the apartment keys, his watch, the one I gave him for his birthday, and a note that simply read, "Take care of yourself." That note broke me more than the cancer ever could. I didn't want to die, but I didn't know how to live either. Not like this. Not bald and sick and alone. I stopped answering the door when my mom came by. I let the food rot in the fridge. I stopped writing, stopped laughing. Some mornings, I didn't even open the curtains. One evening, I sat curled on the floor with Oliver, our rescue dog, the one we adopted together when we still talked about babies in backyards. He laid his head on my lap and looked at me like he knew. Like he missed Liam too. I whispered to him, "He left because I became too much, too broken, too ugly." Oliver just sighed, warm and heavy against me. And in that breath, I heard something I hadn't let myself believe. I was still worthy. A few days later, my mom brought me a gift. A journal. Leather-bound, smooth to the touch, with the words, "Write your heart," etched in gold. I didn't want it at first. I stared at the blank pages like they were mocking me. What was I supposed to say? What could I possibly write that would matter anymore? But one night, I picked it up. I didn't write about Liam. I wrote about me. About the girl who loved sunflower fields in late July. The one who sang off-key in the car and cried during cartoons. I wrote about the little girl I used to be, and the woman I still wanted to become. Slowly, page by page, I found her again. And then I wrote myself a vow. I vow to love myself, even on the days I feel unlovable. I vow to fight for my life, not because others need me, but because I deserve to be here. I vow to never again beg for the love I already carry within me. It didn't fix everything, but it stitched something back together. Then, 9 months after Liam vanished, I got an invitation. It arrived on a Thursday. No return address, just elegant script on cream cardstock. I opened it slowly, my hands steady in a way I didn't expect. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Liam Walker and Chloe Bennett." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard his name in months. I didn't know who Chloe was, but the handwriting was unmistakably his. My name was printed on the envelope. He wanted me to see this. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was cruelty. Maybe he thought I'd already faded into the background of his new life. He was wrong. I wasn't the girl he left behind anymore. I wasn't the weak one, the sick one, the burden. I was someone who had stared death in the face and chosen to live. I was going to that wedding, not to ruin it, not to beg him for answers, but because I had something to say. Something he never let me say the day he left. They say time heals. That's a lie. Time doesn't heal anything. It simply builds a distance between you and the wound, enough for you to learn how to breathe around the pain. I hadn't healed, but I had changed. When the wedding day came, I stood in front of my mirror and looked at the woman staring back. Her face was thinner. Her hair, barely grown back into soft curls, framed her jaw like a halo of resilience. There were hollows under her eyes and a subtle tremor in her left hand, but her spine was straight. Her eyes no longer searched for permission to exist. I didn't wear black. I didn't wear rage. I wore the same pale blue dress I'd bought a year ago, right before everything fell apart. I'd never had the chance to wear it. It had hung in my closet like a ghost, a remnant of a life interrupted. That day, I ironed every wrinkle out of it. It clung to my shoulders with the weight of memory, but it also shimmered in the sunlight like hope. I didn't wear heels. My feet still ached from treatment. I wore flats and painted my toenails red, because they made me feel like someone who still cared about small, beautiful things. I tucked the letter into my purse, the one I wrote the night he left. I hadn't opened it in months, but I remembered every word, every tear-stained sentence. Not long after noon, I stepped out into a world that kept spinning without me and hailed a cab to the venue. It was a vineyard, of course it was. They'd chosen the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Ivy on every column, fairy lights strung between the trees, and violins playing something soft and classical in the distance. The ceremony was already in motion when I arrived. Guests filled rows of white chairs, all facing the altar, where Liam stood in a tailored black tuxedo. The bride had not yet walked down the aisle. I slid quietly into the back row. No one noticed, at least not right away. He did. He turned, like something tugged at the back of his soul, and his eyes met mine. Just for a second. His face didn't change. Not visibly. But I knew him. I saw the flicker, the recognition, the calculation, the flicker of shame. I looked away. It wasn't about him anymore. The officiant welcomed everyone, said something about love being a journey, about choosing each other again and again. And then came the question no one ever expects an answer to. If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. I didn't speak. I stood. And slowly walked down the center aisle. Not toward Liam, but toward the microphone. Gasps filled the air. People turned. Some whispered. Some stared. But no one stopped me. I reached the front, turned to the crowd, and smiled. Gently, not out of bitterness, but because I wasn't here to destroy. I was here to tell the truth. I'm not here to object, I said, my voice calm but carrying. I'm here to speak peace. I could feel Liam stiffen beside me. Chloe, who had appeared at the side of the aisle in her white satin gown, stood frozen. Her eyes narrowed, confused. I pulled out the letter. I wrote this the night someone I loved walked out of my life, I continued. I didn't send it then. I couldn't. I didn't have the strength. But I have it now. My hands didn't tremble. I read, Dear Liam, you left on the day I needed you most. You didn't look back. You didn't call. And for a long time, I believed it was because I had become something too heavy to carry. I hated you. Then I hated myself for loving you. Then I stopped hating. I started healing. Not because of anything you did, but because I chose to keep breathing. And now, I just want to say, thank you. Thank you for leaving when you did. Because in your absence, I found something more powerful than love. I found myself. And I vow, publicly and clearly, never again to abandon her. Silence. Not the awkward kind, the sacred kind. I folded the letter and stepped down from the microphone, and then I walked away. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't check his expression. I didn't care what anyone said after I left. But as I passed Chloe, our eyes met. She didn't look angry. She didn't look betrayed. She looked haunted. She had questions she hadn't asked him. I left her with them. Outside, the sun was still shining. Birds still chirped in the trees. The world hadn't ended. In fact, it had begun again. I walked to the edge of the vineyard, found a bench overlooking the hills, and sat down. I pulled out my phone. A message blinked on the screen from an unknown number. That was brave. I don't know who you are, but I hope you keep telling your story. It had already begun to spread. Somebody had recorded it. I didn't go to destroy, I went to reclaim. And in doing so, I realized something I never expected. My vow wasn't for him. It wasn't even for the girl I used to be. It was for the woman I was becoming. The internet has a strange way of finding you when you least expect it. By the time I got home from the vineyard, the video was already up. Someone had recorded the entire thing. Me walking down the aisle in my pale blue dress, reading the letter, the silence that followed. It was shaky, not high quality, but raw. Honest. Too honest to ignore. By morning, it had gone viral. TikTok, Instagram Reels, Twitter, Facebook, even YouTube reaction videos with titles like, "She read her survival vows at her ex's wedding. I'm not crying, you are." Comments flooded in by the thousands. Most of them were from strangers. Women, mostly. Some men. People who had been left. People who were sick. People who had stayed strong for too long and needed to be reminded that surviving is its own kind of love story. They called me the Survivor Bride. It was a strange nickname. I wasn't a bride. I wasn't even anyone's girlfriend. But the name stuck, and so did the responsibility. At first, I didn't know how to respond. Should I ignore it? Let it fade? But something kept nudging at me, an idea that wouldn't go away. So I opened my laptop and created a blog, Letters to My Healing Self. The first entry was the letter I read at the wedding. The second was everything I didn't get to say that day, the parts of the story that didn't make it into that 5-minute moment. I wrote about the treatments, the fear, the days I counted my breaths, because that was all I could manage. I wrote about shaving my head before it fell out, just to feel like I had a choice. About the nurse who held my hand during my second round of chemo and whispered, "You're stronger than this disease." And I wrote about Liam. Not to bash him, not to make him a villain, but to be honest. To show what it means to be left behind and still find your way forward. I didn't expect what happened next. Emails from women across the world. One from Brazil, one from South Korea. One from a woman in a small town in Georgia who wrote, "You gave me the courage to leave a man who watched me suffer and never once said, 'I'm here.' Thank you for teaching me that leaving is sometimes the first act of self-love." It overwhelmed me, but in the best way. And then came the invitations. First, it was a podcast, then a local news segment, then an invitation to speak at a women's health fundraiser. I almost said no to that last one. What did I know about speeches? About standing in front of hundreds of people and telling them something meaningful? But my mom, sweet, fierce, unwavering, looked at me and said, "You don't have to be a polished speaker, honey. You just have to be you. You're enough." So I stood on that stage, knees knocking in borrowed heels, and told my story. And they stood for me. Not because I was perfect, but because I had lived, and I was finally letting myself be seen. 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. A real letter. Ink on paper, no return address. It was from Chloe, Liam's wife. I hesitated before opening it. For a moment, I considered throwing it away. But curiosity won. Her handwriting was elegant, slanted slightly to the right. "Emma, I don't know what I expected when I saw you that day. I didn't know your name. I didn't know your story. But I felt something shift. That night, Liam told me everything. Or at least, enough. He didn't just leave you, he ran. He was afraid of watching someone he loved disappear. So he disappeared first. I don't write this to excuse him. I write this to say, thank you. You saved me from a marriage built on half-truths. I left him. It's only been a few weeks, but I feel free for the first time in a long time. I don't know if you believe in fate, but I think you were meant to speak that day, not just for yourself. With gratitude, Chloe. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal, between the pages of my own vows. Not for safekeeping, but for closure. Some people asked me if I ever heard from Liam again. I did. One message. Short. Careful. I'm sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve that. I never replied. Because I wasn't that girl anymore. The one who waited for him to come back. I was building something new, something better. My blog had turned into a book deal. The Survivor Vows. A collection of letters, entries, and healing stories from others like me. I was compiling them all. Some were tragic, some were hilarious. All of them were real. And on the day the first copy arrived in the mail, wrapped in cellophane and stamped with my name, I wept. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't, and I hadn't even noticed when that feeling disappeared. 6 months later, I stood on a different stage, a TEDx stage, wearing a soft white dress this time, not for a wedding, but for something far more sacred, a vow to the world, to survivors, to anyone who had been left and still learned how to stand. I looked out at the crowd and said, I didn't come here to tell you how to heal. I came here to tell you that it's okay if you haven't. Healing isn't pretty. It's messy, nonlinear, and full of relapses. But it's possible, and it starts the moment you decide that you matter, even if the people you loved couldn't see it. They stood. Again. And this time, I stood with them, not as a guest at someone else's story, but as the author of my own. I still have the letter, the original one, the one I read at the wedding. Sometimes I pull it out, not to dwell, but to remember. Because that letter wasn't just my goodbye to him, it was my hello to me. There's a moment that comes after healing, a strange, quiet moment when you realize the ache is no longer running the show. When the pain you once held like a second skin now feels like something you could take off, fold neatly, and place in a drawer. I didn't notice it at first. It came slowly, like sunlight sneaking through a curtain. One morning, I brewed coffee and forgot to think about Liam. Another day, I caught my reflection in a shop window and smiled without fixing anything. I laughed without guilt, danced in my living room without wondering if it was stupid. I said no when I needed to, and I said yes to new things, new people, new versions of myself. That's when I met Daniel. Not through some meet cute at a bookstore or a spilled drink scenario. No, it was at a writing workshop I was invited to lead. He was in the back row, quiet, observant, a little skeptical. Afterward, he walked up to me with a copy of the Survivor Vows in hand. I read your story, he said. You don't write like someone who's angry. You write like someone who's made peace. I laughed. Anger was too heavy. I had to put it down eventually. That conversation turned into coffee, then into a hike, then into a Thursday night habit, then into Sunday mornings. And one day, I looked up and realized he was no longer new. He was safe. He was steady. He was kind in a quiet way, never rushing me, never asking for more than I had to give. And he never once brought up Liam. Not until I did. We were watching the sunset from a park bench, and I was fidgeting with the hem of my sleeve. I turned to him and said, You know, there's a part of me that still wonders what it means to love again. He didn't flinch. He just nodded and said, You don't have to know yet. I'm here either way. And he stayed. Through the hard days, when I still had blood work and fatigue, through the occasional nightmares, through book signings and media interviews, and moments when I felt small again. He never tried to fix me. He just held space for all the versions of me that showed up. I didn't fall in love quickly, but I did fall, slowly, carefully, like stepping into a river after a long winter, testing the waters, letting myself be held, and eventually, I let go of the edge. The night he proposed, we were alone in his apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes and old vinyl records. There were no candles, no flowers, just us. He handed me a notebook. Inside was a single sentence. "Will you write your next vows with me?" I cried. Not because I was afraid, but because for the first time, I wasn't. But even then, I didn't say yes right away. Instead, I asked him to wait, one more time, because I needed to go back. A week later, I returned to the vineyard. Not for Liam, not for memories, but for me. It was empty, off-season, quiet. The same ivy climbed the columns, the same light filtered through the trees, but the air felt different, lighter. I walked to the altar, where I had once read my survival vows, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to Liam, not to the past, but to the woman who stood there, the one who didn't know what would come next, but chose to speak anyway. I placed a hand over my heart and said aloud, "You did good. I'm proud of you." Then I went home. And I said yes. Planning the wedding was nothing like I expected. I didn't want grand. I didn't want extravagant. I wanted real. We held it in my mom's backyard. String lights, wood chairs, a playlist of songs that meant something, a sunflower bouquet. Daniel wore a navy suit. I wore a dress with long sleeves and lace at the wrists. It wasn't white. It was a soft blush that reminded me of cherry blossoms and healing. When it came time to say our vows, I didn't read from a letter. I spoke from memory. I vow to love you not because you fixed me, but because you never tried to. I vow to honor the quiet ways you've taught me to trust again. I vow to keep becoming, again and again, because you've shown me that love is not a rescue mission. It's a partnership, a garden, a sunrise. Daniel smiled through tears. And when he read his vows, he ended with this: "You walked into someone else's wedding and claimed your story. Now I vow to walk beside you in every chapter you write next." We kissed. And the world didn't stop. But mine finally slowed down. After the ceremony, an older woman came up to me, someone I didn't recognize. She clutched a copy of the survivor vows to her chest. "I was there," she whispered. "At the vineyard. I saw you speak that day. I was going to cancel my treatment, but you changed my mind." I held her hand and said, "You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." It's been a year now. My hair has grown out to soft waves. The fatigue comes and goes, but I know how to manage it. I still write, still speak, still hear from readers who see themselves in my story. But now, when I write my name at the end of each post, I do so with a new kind of signature. Not Emma, the survivor. Not Emma, the abandoned fiancée. Just Emma Blake, wife, writer, whole. And every now and then, I pull out my old journal, the leather-bound one with "Write Your Heart" etched on the cover. I flip past the pain, past the vows written in trembling hands, until I find a blank page, and I begin again.